So in this section, I'm going to bring up again a completely new concept, and which is the order in which you eat your foods. And we're used to eating salads first and then order main course, or we, say appetizer and then the main course. But really, there is a deeper science behind this when you look at it from an Ayurvedic perspective. Now, the goal is that you want to eat food when your Agni is activated and high and functioning at its best. So, when you first come to your table and you look at your meal, the fact that your Agni is still high, it's ready to get food. According to Ayurveda, you actually eat the heaviest portion of the meal first. So you actually start out by just a little bit of activation of your Agni. What I recommend is a little piece of ginger, maybe soaked in some lemon juice for a few hours with a little bit of salt, and just place that on your tongue. And that can even further stimulate your Agni or your digestive fire. And that's when you begin eating, and you want to go for what's Madhura Rasa, the biggest portion of your meal, the most nourishing, heaviest portion of your meal. Because while your Agni is still at its best, it can do an effective job of breaking down that which is the heaviest. We do it in a reverse order when we have the bitter greens, the salads first. Of course, if you were to consume something like a bowl, you could have those cooked greens with the heaviest portion of your meal, and that's fine. But the one thing you definitely don't want to do is leave the heaviest portion of your meals towards the ending. So no dessert in the ending. If you've ever gone to an Ayurvedic or an Indian brunch, the traditional sweets are always placed at the front. And this is the reason. You want to get to them while your fire is still burning hot, and then you want to get to the lighter stuff. If you do end up reversing the order and you have the bitter greens first, and what the bitter greens do, what the bitter taste does, is it kind of cools your system down. It starts scraping things off even before you actually have them in your gut. So it's also going to lower your digestive fire. And often people feel like, oh, I ate a salad, I'm not hungry anymore, even though it was so light. The reason for that is your Agni has gone out. So when you ask yourself the question, what has this done to the environment of your gut? It's actually put out your fire. It's put out your digestive fire. So it may feel like you've eaten less calories. You may feel like it's lighter in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to affect your metabolic activity, because you always want to make sure that you're never too dry, you're never too cold. And that's exactly what eating a salad in the beginning would do. So with that, the order of the foods go like the little piece of ginger or something that's stimulating, a pickle, to your appetite, and then you go for the biggest portion. Of course, they can be combined with the 5 other tastes, but you want to go for the madhura or the sweet rasa, and you call it a day, and that's the end of your meal. And when you do it this way, you will begin to notice a difference in the way your foods digest. How often have you looked at the serving size of something and felt like, oh, I couldn't eat all of it, or I want to eat more of it? And then you may eat the same serving of a certain food and notice that another friend of yours can eat that same exact quantity but react differently. I've heard this several times that people tell me I eat very little and I still feel very big. So, what really is the right portion? I mean, are we going to rely upon labels to determine portions? Now, while that can be useful to a certain extent, the whole goal of this course is to bring the attention back to you. So, according to Ayurveda, the Ayurvedic understanding is that you really tune into your natural appetite and hunger. And you say that if my stomach was divided in 3 parts, how is it that I want to fill these 3 parts? And ideally, a meal should comprise of 1/3 solids, 1/3 liquid, and 1/3 portion should be left untouched, empty. And that is because you need that little space for your Agni, for the Agni, which imagine it to be like a little bonfire. So you need that little wind for it to be constantly stoked, for things to move around in your stomach. Now, how are you going to assess what is 1/3 solid, 1/3 liquid? My suggestion is before you begin to eat, really tune in and see where is that hunger coming from. Does it come from the chest? Does it come from the gut? If it comes from the chest, it's probably a craving which is emotional. If it comes from genuine hunger, then you want to eat your foods. And when it says 1/3 liquid, it means that your foods are predominantly eaten in a semi-solid form. The code for this is the understanding is that you don't eat foods that are all solid and dense. You make them liquefied so that they're smoother and they're easier to digest. And then when you're done eating, then you tune in again and see how full it is that you feel. A lot of us are used to eating till we feel very, very full and then rely upon that little food coma to make ourselves feel comfortable. But when you're able to systematically notice how you feel before and how you feel after, you can gradually come to a good understanding of portion size. But what can also happen is that depending on the time of the day, depending on the season, depending on the state of your balance, your appetite may differ. But when you tune in this way and you're able to take into account how full your stomach feels, so maybe a little bit could satiate you at one point, and maybe you need a little bit more at other times. But then you're really bringing the intelligence back to you. The goal is to bring the intelligence back to you to be able to really tune into your Agni. Because dumping your Agni with more foods is going to affect the environment of the Agni, and giving it less than it needs, again, is going to create havoc. So you tune in and determine what portions work for you. There is one last thing that I'd like to say is that when you look at the 1/3 solid and the 1/3 liquid, and you identify that the foods need to be predominantly in a liquefied form, and we think about some of the protein-rich foods that we've become used to eating, which are very dry and very dense, those may measure out really well in their nutrient content in the laboratory. But if they're going to hurt the digestive environment, if they're going to make it slower and denser, they're contraindicated. So when it comes to assessing how to eat, how much to eat, or the matra of your foods, the amount of portion, really is something else that, again, you want to take back the control for. And assessing it in this manner will allow for that to happen. So what is the first thing that you get offered at a restaurant is a glass of cold ice water. And you drink it sometimes, you don't at other times. But then often people wonder, when is the right time to drink water, and should I drink water with my meals? Now let's really get into this, because when you drink water, really changes how effectively your food is metabolized. Now, in the Ayurvedic understanding, right, just think about it. You're hungry, your Agni is nice and happy, and then you take a glass of water, and then you gulp it down. That's like a little rainstorm before you've even started planting your seeds, and nothing goes well then. Think of it like a little puddle sitting in your gut, and often people feel like I've had so much water that I can't eat. I also want you to use the example of a blender. If you're making a chutney or a pesto in a blender and you throw in a lot of water at first, and then you throw in your solids and then you blend it, it becomes very liquefied. And that's kind of what happens to the food. Instead of staying in that semi-solid consistency, there's a little pool. Your Agni has died down and a mechanism is kicked in whereby everything starts churning really fast and your body cannot effectively extract nutrients. Then what about drinking water after meals, which is also what certain people do? And now I want you to think about, like, your Agni is nice and happy. It's assessed what's coming in. It's actively breaking down the foods one by one. And it's kept itself at the right temperature. So it's like you're cooking in the oven. And now suddenly, while you're cooking, somebody turns the oven off or takes out your tray and pours a lot of water in it. Everything goes cold and things kind of stop. The metabolism, the breakdown stops. And that's what happens when you drink a lot of water after your meals. With that, undigested residue is left sitting in your gut. You feel heavy, and The Ayurvedic understanding is it builds extra poor quality, unnecessary tissue. So, when is the right time to drink water, and what is the type of water to drink? So, the right time to drink water with meals is actually with your meal. If you've noticed, there's a lot of cultures that drink a little bit of green tea or a hot liquid with their foods. And that again goes back to the concept that you need 1/3 solid, 1/3 liquid. Again, I'm going to bring you to the understanding of that little blender. And if you've ever blended anything, and if you pour liquid right intermittently, it blends really, really well. And a little sip here, a little sip there, especially hot water, which will not alter the environment or the temperature of the gut, can really support the digestion and the blending together with your foods. So, just summing this up for you again is when water is consumed before you start eating, it puts out your digestive fire, liquefies it, just pushes it all out without extracting nutrients. Ayurvedic understanding is that it will leave you undernourished. When you drink water after your meals, your body is nicely in that right temperature zone, and you put liquid in it, it'll slow things down. It will leave you poorly but overnourished, building more than you want to. But if you drink the right quantity of hot or warm water intermittently, a sip by sip during your meals, that may support in breaking down your foods, blending them together, and effective metabolism. So we often take pride in, like, I'm so busy that I eat on the go. What is really the right way to eat? What is the right posture to eat? Is there even a science behind the posture? Now, once again, in Ayurveda, how you sit to eat can really change the way your Agni functions. And Agni is everything. Agni is life. Your digestive environment is really what determines how things churn in your body. So, what is the right way to sit and eat? I want to take you back into my childhood. When I was growing up, a dining table sitting on a chair was something that I literally saw only happen in movies on a daily basis. And I grew up in an urban metropolitan city, but I grew up with 14 people, and we sat cross-legged on the floor, usually in a circle, eating our meals. And then on occasion, we would want to sit on the dining table. So the right way, again, to eat your meals is crisscross applesauce, cross-legged, in Sukhasana, and preferably on the ground. And when you can't do it on the ground, then you're able to sit on the chair. I actually will often go to restaurants and I'll sit cross-legged on the chair and I'll eat. I'll take the bench side. I'll go and grab that first without being overly conspicuous. And even if it is, you want to sit that way as much as possible. So why? What is the science behind sitting cross-legged? Now, your Agni, right, or your digestive fire, I want you to think of it actually as a bonfire. You're really putting out that fireplace, putting on that fireplace. And it needs a really steady base. And if you've seen any of the yoga postures, when they're sitting and doing any energetic work, it is that cross-legged, wide-based position. And your crisscross, the cross-legged position, gives you that wide base. And it also engages your abdominal muscles. You actually need to engage your muscles. So all the blood rushes there automatically and naturally. Then your fire, your Agni, gets even more activated. Now, the other thing in Ayurveda is that standing, there is a saying in Ayurveda that a person who is always standing and drinking water, death is lurking behind him. Now, while of course that is an exaggeration, it kind of gives you an insight into how detrimental it is to be standing and consuming food. And the reason for that, again, is of course your abdominals are not engaged, blood is rushing through the legs, but also, right, your anal sphincter is actually considered to be a vent in Ayurveda, which means if you're standing and your anal sphincter is a little bit more open and more relaxed, your warmth, your heat from the Agni is actually escaping out of your anus, of your anal sphincter. So when you sit down and you engage your muscles in that way, you're actually kind of closing in your pelvis and you're giving that Agni a strong base. So as much as possible, we want to be able to sit And whenever possible, you want to be sitting in a cross-legged position. Of course, you want the spine to be as tall as you can. And also, sitting in a vehicle and consuming food is again detrimental because there is a constant motion, the agni that should be steady and sharp, right? Imagine your bonfire. If the base is moving constantly, it becomes a little volatile. And the rate of breakdown and the way nutrients are extracted from it, not the most effective. So, one single change that you can make to your diet and the way you eat is how you sit to eat. And you will notice a huge difference and the timing of digestion and the quality of digestion. Now, while Ayurveda talks about what should you cook in, it doesn't talk about flatware, it doesn't talk about spoons and forks because it wants you to eat with your hands. All foods are finger foods, even if you're eating khichdi. And that's what we do in my household. And the reason for that is when you touch your food, when you bring that sense of touch to your food, and your nerve endings in your fingertips can feel the food, the texture, and the temperature, it already prepares your digestion for what's coming. So the aromas will prepare your digestion. The aromas combined with the touch of your hands. And then you eat those foods. Not only does it make for an amazing meal experience, it really sets you up for better digestion. So as homework, right, I have provided you with a circadian rhythm chart. So you can actually look at it and sit on it and see if you can feel those predominant energies and really tune into your body and observe them so that you can conduct your lifestyle and your activities and the way you eat according to the rhythm of the sun. Another thing that I want to offer you is something that I find really effective is I call it the FMP journal, the Food, Mood, and Poop Journal. Because what I often find is when you begin to really write down what you're eating, and I actually want you to start doing this even before you've taken into account some of the guidelines. And how was your digestion that day? How were you feeling that day? And you may add, we've added another column to it called S, symptoms. So it becomes the FMPS journal, the Food, Mood, Poop, and Symptom Journal. And you start noticing what happens for you. And then as you begin to make some of these changes and eat bigger lunches and give up the fruit in the morning and sleep at a certain time, include all the 6 tastes, eat heavier foods at the start of your meal, and you start seeing magically as the weeks go by that your symptoms feel milder, your digestion feels much stronger. Most of all, I see that within 3 weeks, people start noticing that their bowel movements have regulated, where they're not only going every day, they're going every day, usually in the mornings. And which is one great indicator of good digestion and good health is having that bowel movement early on in the day. What this FMPS journal will also allow you to do is kind of notice if certain foods don't agree with your body. You may have been completely missing, certain ingredients, certain foods, but it's I would say 50% of all diagnosis that I do relies upon this FMPS journal. So I want to offer it to you and I hope you find it useful.